Hey, hey.
I saw where he pointed. He was going to B&B, and he was in the South building. I said, "Are you trying to go to B&B?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "It's in the other building." You know, because it's trying to figure out which building something's in. When you get in the South building, there's an East wing and a West wing, and it'll tell you like the room number will be W160, and you gotta which direction is that?
It took me
But I've
this year to get this. When you come in the state house, it's the first floor. It's what you think is the basement, but it's actually the first floor. So I would take student groups there all the time, and a lot of times I'll have students meet me there, and I would always say incorrectly, like, "Oh, we're gonna go on the second floor, but it's really the first floor."
It's really the first floor, yeah.
Where there is a benefit to that because they all think it's when I was wrong, we were all wrong together, so we're on the same page.
So when I started the South building, the South office building was my parking lot.
And then were you in the state house or were
No, I was in the North building. The North building was there.
Oh, okay.
The North building was finished, I think. I want to say originally like 73, maybe, something like that.
Oh, I didn't realize.
Late 60s, early 70s.
Yeah.
And then it was remodeled at the time they built the South building, which was, and it was all finished. And we moved out to our processing center. So it was out by the old airport. Now it's at Merrifield. We all got temporarily moved while they did floor by floor.
Yeah.
Remodeled the North building. So it reopened in '92. The South building.
It sounded good, Teddy. We heard you.
That was his recital song.
Oh, no, I could tell. It sounded very nice.
Good.
He has me a day. He could play it. In the bag. We can do that. Yeah.
It's a cucumber.
I'm gonna drop this in the website, make sure everything's muted or whatever.
So I did text.
People are gonna be able to see it.
Today, so who's it on?
Yeah, I was going to play.
Okay, that's fine.
Matt, you're up.
Yeah, because that's fine.
What's up?
You're up. The news is back.
Oh, I think Laura's.
Yeah.
He
I've always been told that things will unfold if you keep on waiting. But then you came along and proved me all wrong. I was so mistaken. 'Cause you glue all the pieces back together. Yeah, you take all my wrongs and make them better. Yeah, you're making me wanna try forever. And I feel so free. Oh, my sweet baby. I was never the one to give up the ghost. No, I was so stuck. I kept on playing my part, wanted to give up 'cause nothing was changing. But with you it's so clear, and now that you're here I see colors in every spectrum. Guess I finally learned my lesson. 'Cause you glue all the pieces back together. Yeah, you take all my wrongs and make them better. Yeah, you're making me wanna try forever. And I feel so free. Oh, my sweet baby. And I think to myself, and I'm thinking out loud, we won't need nothing else for the rest of our time. And I know it so well, I will always be by your side. 'Cause you glue all the pieces back.
Good. I love. I think so. Right. That's. 2016 was a career. Good evening. If you want to go ahead and find your seat, and you don't have to scamper, I won't rush you. Let's see, is this excellent? Is this better now? Awesome. Thank you for saying that. Good evening and welcome to Castleton United Methodist Church. This is for our second forum in a series of 4 focused on the housing crisis in our community. My name is Laura Merrifield Wilson, and I want to thank all of you for attending our conversation this evening. I hope we have a robust discussion. And one thing I'll say several times over is how important that it is we don't just listen and learn, but hopefully we find a way to become engaged, to do, to find our place and our path to contribute. And you're obviously interested in doing that because you're present here with us tonight. So I want to thank you for taking that first step. I want to let you know about some upcoming events before we get into our topic and our conversation today. And in particular, that part about doing something. If you wanted some suggestions, I'll tell you that our church is participating in the Gleaners Food Bank Drive this summer. We actually had one just earlier this afternoon, every Tuesday, in the shopping center parking lot at 75th and Shadeland. And this is from 3 to 5, Tuesdays, June through August. And Pastor Matt shared with me earlier this evening that we serve nearly 200 families this afternoon. Yes. And when you think of the difference that that makes, and it is related in terms of housing security, certainly food insecurity is another challenge that our community faces, as obviously municipalities do nationally as well. But I think that's wonderful. So if you're interested, you can sign up by going to castletonumc.org/gleaners. I also want to note that you can watch all of our forums online. So thank you for being present today. I'll talk later about the upcoming forums. We have another one planned in July, and in August. If you missed the one we had in May, that's also available on our website. And you can go to castletonumc.org/housing. For July, we'll be coming back again on July 16th here on Tuesday at 6:30. As they say, same place, same time. And we'll talk about how housing influences health outcomes. Our final installment for this series will be on August 6th, another Tuesday, another 6:30, same place, same time. And we'll be talking about government's role in housing.
The last thing I want to say before we dive into our topic tonight is to talk about the Lawrence School Emergency Fund. And if you were here in the first panel, we talked about this with that forum and how you can contribute to that. It's really helpful for the students because it is money that the schools can provide for children facing these issues of homelessness. And I want to let you know that you can contribute to that. We have plates in the back, and again, you can also go to our website and provide if you feel so called. So this evening we have an incredibly esteemed panel that we collected to join with us today as we talk about the issues involving homelessness, housing insecurity, and crime, violence in our community. Much like I would say with food insecurity, this is something that isn't necessarily unique to Indianapolis, but it's something that's really important for us to address and something that I think we all feel called, right? We all recognize as an issue, something we want to improve upon. I want to share with you some statistics that I think are really helpful. And the first is to talk about a recent study that came out of Cornell. And in particular, they described the problem of evictions as a destabilizing force. And in this study, one of the things that they said is it actually disrupts the ability of residents to form social connections and come together to solve collective issues. I think we'll hear a lot about that this evening. We also know that in the last 2 years, we've seen a decrease in crime in Indianapolis, which is excellent, but it's still over 200 homicides a year, which is something that's probably concerning to us all. And the final statistic I will throw out there for you is talking about handgun deaths in youth, something for me as a mother of 3 that's very concerning. But when we talk about firearms in 2021, they continue to be the leading cause of death amongst U.S. children. We're not talking about drowning, we're not talking about choking, we're not talking about car accidents, we're talking about firearms. And when you look from 2018 to 2021, there was a 41.6 increase in that rate. So one of the things I always like to ask when I'm learning about these issues is it improving? Are the good things getting better? Are we minimizing? Are we able to address some of the challenges? And when we're talking about firearms and children, unfortunately, they're going in the wrong direction. So throwing those ideas out to you as I do, I want to go ahead and introduce myself and have our panelists introduce themselves, and then we'll dive right into the questions. So as I said, my name's Laura Merrifield Wilson. I am honored to be your moderator this evening for the forum. Professionally, I'm an associate professor of political science and a pre-law advisor at the University of Indianapolis. I also serve as a regular political analyst in the media. Now I'm going to ask each one of our panelists first, and this is a test, to make sure that your microphone is on. Excellent. And then hold it close enough so that our wonderful audience can hear you. But if you could just briefly introduce yourself, and we'll just go down the row.
Good evening. My name is Chris Bailey. I am the Chief of Police for the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department. I've been in that role since January of this year, appointed by Mayor Hogsett. I have been in every merit rank in the police department, from patrol officer, sergeant, lieutenant, captain, commander, major, deputy chief, assistant chief, and now I'm the chief of police. So I've spent my entire career here. I was formerly the North District commander, so at one point this church, this neighborhood was under my command. It was my favorite assignment. If I could go back a few years, I would stay there. Right, John? Yeah, John would prefer that I'd stayed there, but I'm happy to be here tonight to talk about these issues and answer any questions that you all may have.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having us, and thank you to all of you for coming to listen to us tonight. I am Zach Myers. I'm the United States Attorney for the Southern District of Indiana. Means I head the office. It's part of the U.S. Department of Justice. You know, my boss is Attorney General Garland. I was appointed in 2021 by President Biden and confirmed by the U.S. Senate to run this office that does virtually all the federal prosecutions in the Southern District of Indiana, which is the southern 2/3 of the state, sort of everything south of Purdue, Kokomo, Muncie, Anderson, headquartered in Indianapolis, and then we have offices in Evansville and New Albany and Terre Haute as well. Before becoming U.S. Attorney, I spent about 10 years in Indianapolis and Baltimore as a regular federal prosecutor and assistant U.S. Attorney, and I grew up here in Indianapolis, and I'm happy to be able to talk to everybody today. Thanks.
My name is Andrew Neal. I am the CEO of Outreach. So Outreach is a nonprofit here in the Indianapolis area that serves 14 to 24-year-olds who are experiencing homelessness. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that tonight. Prior to that, my family actually moved out here from Denver, Colorado about 10 years ago, specifically to serve the Brookside neighborhood on the Near East Side. We felt called to be part of a church where I was a pastor, where we started a church-based nonprofit. So poured ourselves into that, and then 2 years ago became the CEO of this great ministry at Outreach. And my family actually just lives a couple of blocks away from here, across from Skiles Test Elementary, so we're proud members of this Lawrence community.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tiffany Wilson, and I'm with the Beacon of Hope Crisis Center. I'm the Senior Director of Quality Assurance and Compliance there. I've been with the agency for about 8 years. Our agency, we serve domestic violence and sexual assault victims, so we serve everyone, men, women, and children. We are located on the south side of Indianapolis, but we do serve anyone from anywhere in the state of Indiana. Specifically, the main counties we serve are Marion County, Johnson County, Shelby County, Boone County, Hamilton, and Hendricks County. And a little bit, I guess, about me is I've been doing this work for about 15 years, and it's never stopping on the work that we do. It's continuous, and it fits in perfectly with this forum, because that's something that we hear daily from victims is they want to be able to safely flee, but they're unable to because of the housing crisis.
Terrific. So I told you they were esteemed, right? I'm going to throw out my first very broad question, but just talking in terms of your position. You introduced yourself, talked about your title, about where you've lived, and a little bit about the work you do, but could you describe a little bit more in your daily interactions or the responsibilities you have professionally, how those are involved in terms of either housing or violence? We can start over here, actually, if that works.
All right, so I'm responsible for almost 1,900 employees. The IMPD serves almost 1 million people in 400 square miles. Obviously, we're responsible for the safety and security of the entire county, Marion County and city of Indianapolis. And we're divided into 6 geographic districts. And our intersection of violent crime is obviously, it's obvious with the police. However, all the issues related in society intersect with IMPD at some point. We deal with pretty much everything. About 80% of the incidents that our officers deal with are not necessarily related to crime. A crime hasn't been committed. It's a disturbance. It's mediating issues between family members, between neighbors. A lot of the things we do now has been cast upon law enforcement to deal with, and IMPD policing generally aren't equipped to deal with all the ills of society. We're dealing with sometimes 21, 22-year-old people that are being called to people's houses, adults, 40, 45-year-olds, or whatever it is, and that we expect that officer to solve that particular issue for those individuals. So we see our unhoused neighbors. We see everyday victims of sexual and domestic violence, victims traumatized by violent crime, whether it's children left behind, children who lose parents, loved ones, siblings, wives, cousins, aunts, uncles that are left there when someone is taken from us, whether via overdose or a violent crime. And so all these things intersect with law enforcement, and especially today.
So our office kind of has 2 primary sides of the house, our criminal division and our civil division, who each do, I think, important work in these areas. On the civil division, one of the duties that they have is we have several attorneys in our civil rights group that do affirmative civil litigation. Essentially, they bring lawsuits and work on investigations, or sometimes just work with entities or individuals to enforce federal law in civil court in terms of statutes like the Fair Housing Act, which prohibits practices like redlining or other improper discrimination in terms of access to housing or access to housing finances, or issues that push people out of housing sometimes, like sexual harassment in housing, in public housing. And in addition to sort of that work that we do to try to make sure that there's equity and access in housing, on the civil side, working with our partners in DC that we do those cases with, we also have a fairly robust criminal division of about 35 or so federal prosecutors. Now that's 35 or so prosecutors for 60 counties and 4.2 million people. But on the federal side, we're able to, our laws are different, our processes are different than most of what you'll see from my friends in the Marion County Prosecutor's Office and other prosecutors throughout the state. But the federal cases, everything we bring is a federal case. So, you're bringing in the feds, you're doing usually the more complex cases or long-term cases, or just the cases that are sort of super serious, whether it's because of what happened in that particular incident or the history of this individual and the impact that what we're investigating has had on the community. Because, since we have sort of limited numbers of prosecutors and we also have limited jurisdiction, there's a lot of, not every crime is a federal crime. So we have to really pick our shots and make sure that we're using the resources we're given by the public to have the most powerful impact on public safety, on upholding the rule of law. And violent crime is a top priority because of that, not just because of the impacts of especially gun violence on the victims and the witnesses, but gun violence has these just knock-on negative effects for an entire community, generational trauma to the families that are impacted and loved ones are taken away. Individuals, because of their choices, ending up incarcerated and the impact on the community that happens there. But also when there are shootings and killings in your community, it has an impact on people's ability to afford housing, people's interest in living in those areas, and just violent crime really saps neighborhoods in a way that is detrimental. And even though not every assault, not every shooting is a federal crime, when you have those firearms involved, those are areas that frequently we can get involved in, whether the firearm is unlawfully in the hands of somebody. If they're prohibited from having the firearm under federal law, we can bring prosecutions there. Or if the firearm has been unlawfully transferred from one person to another, or someone has lied in the course of obtaining that firearm in violation of federal law, or they use a firearm in the course of some other federal crimes, such as carjackings, commercial robberies, drug trafficking. So those areas of federal prosecution, especially when there's guns involved, are really a priority for us, because even as these homicide numbers have gone down, and we all know it's overwhelmingly guns that are being used to take the lives and cause serious injuries to our friends and neighbors, we know that getting those guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them is going to drive those numbers down even more. And as you alluded to, even as the overall numbers have gone down, we've still had, really troubling rates of violence impacting young people, both as shooters and as victims. And so finding ways to further, use our prosecution and investigation resources to drive those numbers down and to try to make the community safer is really a top priority for us.
So outreach, we are focused on a very specific population, 14 to 24-year-olds, what I think a lot of the city would call opportunity youth, is kind of the language that's used. 2 years ago, we came out with a study that estimates that in Marion County alone, there are 7,800 14 to 24-year-olds who experience homelessness in a given year. It's something that we're not talking about nearly enough. Outreach is one of the few agencies that work with a very broad spectrum of homelessness. So when we talk about the HUD definition of homelessness, there's different categories. We work with all those categories, from someone who is experiencing literal unsheltered homelessness to someone who might be couch surfing, to someone who might be fleeing domestic violence, to other special populations as well. So we do that through a few different program centers that we have in the city. So there's one on the Near East Side, there's one on the Old South Side. We just opened one last year at Lawrence United Methodist Church, so up here. At those community centers, those program centers, basic needs are able to be met, so warm meals, showers, laundry, case management, things like that. We have a Youth Link program that works to navigate those youth and young adults into various housing programs in the city. We do a diversion program that prevents literal homelessness by doing creative housing problem solving with those young people. And then we also have our in-school program. And so that is working specifically with McKinney-Vento students in high schools throughout the city. And so like you guys, if you were here for the last forum, you probably heard from some of our friends at Lawrence. We work very closely. We have our coaches inside of Lawrence, both high schools, to be able to provide services. We provide services at Pike and Washington, as well as all the IPS high schools. And then over the next year, you'll see us start to expand into Hamilton County as well, because we know youth homelessness is not just a Marion County problem. So that's a little bit about outreach. And then my job, I get to go out and I get to share about the good work that our staff is doing. I mean, they're the real heroes behind the scene. They're the ones working with the youth and young adults. And then, we continue to grow that team we're about 30 individuals right now who are part of it. And really trying to bring more awareness is my job to specifically youth homelessness in our city.
Okay, I had a feeling you would ask this question. For me, in my role, I do quite a bit at the agency. Not only am I helping to oversee the agency programs, helping to assist our Senior Director of Advocacy Services and Operations with the advocates, but I'm also our partner liaison. And what that means is I'm the one that's out in the community doing panelists like this, but I'm also in the community training our law enforcement partners, hospital partners, and community partners on domestic violence and sexual assault, statistics, data, talking about our services, what we serve, warning signs, etc. And that is usually me who's out in the community doing that. I'm also in the schools, whether it's in Lawrence County, I'm in Lawrence. If it's on the south side where we're located, it's usually me that's out there. I'm also the one that, in the agency, I help assist our CEO with other tasks that she may need assistance with. So whether it's helping her look over a grant, to helping look at resumes for positions that we're filling, I'm usually the one that's assisting in that area. In regards to how house and violence plays a role in our agency, as I mentioned when I introduced myself, it's something that we do hear from victims on a regular, is that they do want to safely flee from their abusers, but where are they going to go? Shelters are always at capacity. They don't have family or friends who they can stay with, so they're often stuck. And if they do have the financial means to break free and try to rather rent a place, maybe they have the financial means to where they want to purchase a home, or if they want to rent an apartment, the housing crisis right now, everything's so limited. And so a lot of our victims are struggling to find a place to go. And because of that, they're ultimately left still staying with their abusers, and a lot of them are still staying with them for financial reasons. And so we deal with that on a regular basis, ultimately always looking for resources available, updating our resources with the most affordable apartments that we know within whatever area that their victim is asking about, to maybe trying to get them to do private landlords in certain places like that. Oftentimes, a lot of our victims do run into homelessness, and we do serve the population of 13 to 26, and some of those victims do say that they're homeless and they're living on the streets and they don't have anywhere to go. And so we're constantly trying to get them into a shelter or connect them with outreach so that they're not on their street and they're also not returning back to their abuser. But it is a struggle, and that's something that we deal with on a regular.
Tiffany, could I follow up on that? You mentioned 13 to 26. Is there something special about that age range?
Yes. So the 13 to 26 population is a program that we called our Purple Sneakers program, and that's where we are out in the community educating specifically that age group on teen dating violence, healthy relationships, and family violence. At our agency, we don't just recognize domestic violence and sexual assault as intimate partner violence, but we recognize family violence. And most of the victims that we do serve, it is family violence. So it's happening within a home, whether it's grandma on mom, grandma on father, it's sibling on sibling, it's cousin on cousin. domestic violence isn't just intimate partner violence. It's anyone who's residing within that household, or also family who don't reside within that household, who might stalk or harass them. And we recognize that. And so our Purple Sneakers program allows us to be out in the community, in the high schools, in the middle schools, elementary schools, hit and miss, and in the colleges to help educate that specific population on healthy relationships and what that looks like, because ultimately we know it starts at a young age. And if we can help make a change, help educate them, help them understand the warning signs, we can hopefully prevent the violence from escalating and prevent homelessness, and then help decrease that number to where we don't have as many young teenagers or young adults living on the streets.
I find that proactive approach to feel really comforting, especially amongst many of the topics we'll discuss tonight that can be very heavy. I want to remind you that if you want to submit a question, we take these online, and it's my responsibility and my joy as moderator to hopefully address all the questions that you shared with us. So I'll be doing that throughout this evening. For our next forum, which is July 16th, again Tuesday at 6:30, that's going to focus on health and homelessness. You can go to our website at castletonumc and .com / wait, I want to make sure I said .com right. Was that? Yes, .org, excuse me. That's why I knew I had to check. /housing, and you can submit your questions there. So I'm going to start with one of the questions a community member asked, and that's specifically for Chief Bailey. A community member wanted to know, what does the homelessness unit do? What does that look like, and how does it interact in our community?
Our homeless unit is assigned, well, when it started probably over 10 years ago, was assigned just to downtown Indianapolis, and the goal was to partner with agencies that interact with our homeless on a daily basis to provide, one, to be kind of a force protection as we go into some of these camps, whether it's down by the river, in some of the woods that many of you probably don't even know exist, but also to go out and interact with those neighbors. Just like there's crime in your neighborhood, in your zip code, there are crime that takes place in these informal or formal camps, for that matter, that the crimes go unreported, whether it's sexual assault or other assaults or theft or burglary or those kind of things. Those things happen in those areas, and those individuals don't tend to come out and report those type of incidents. So we go to them, and over the course of the 10 plus years that has existed, and I will give this agency credit, being forward thinking in this endeavor, not trying to treat our unhoused neighbors as criminals or criminalize homelessness, but to be proactive and try to protect them, going where they are. And because not a lot of people are willing to do that. And there are some really special groups of individuals in our city outside of law enforcement that do go to these places where they are every day to interact with them. And our homeless unit comes alongside those groups. In the winter, they'll go out, really cold weather this winter. There was several news stories that showed our officers going out and interacting with individuals, checking on them, making sure they weren't freezing, if they were getting the medical treatment that they needed, or encouraging them to go find shelter somewhere. Some individuals just they're not going to go to shelter no matter how much you try to give them those options. This is the way they want to live, and there's multiple reasons for that. And so, but knowing that they're there, and some individuals they know by name. So that's what they do on a daily basis, and they work with a mental health clinician as well from Eskenazi, and have from the very beginning. That individual goes out with them also on those visits, but also as they can provide that resource right then and there to individuals that may need the assistance.
How do you measure success for that unit? What do they look like as we know we're meeting our mark, we know we're being effective, we know we're making that change we want to see?
Well, I mean, it's hard to prove, whether or not your efforts have prevented something, but I think it builds a relationship, just like sometimes with our immigrant populations. A lot of our immigrant populations come from areas that don't trust the police, don't have a relationship with police. They're treated much differently in some of these countries that our immigrants come from than they are here. But it also helps us build a relationship with those individuals in case a crime was committed. So when you build that relationship and they know you by name and you can interact with them and they feel comfortable telling you information, then those are successes. But you can't always tell what you've helped or how you've prevented something from happening. I'm glad we do that. It certainly isn't a function of a law enforcement agency. When you think about what our foundational responsibilities are, and it goes back to my original answer, the things that we've engaged ourselves in or we're involved in or we spend a lot of time, money, and energy in are not fundamental purposes of law enforcement as it was built. However, we are one of the only 24-hour, 7-day-a-week government services out there. And when someone calls 911, whether it's for a crime committed or for something else, they expect someone to show up there and be there, and that's what law enforcement provides. And so we found value in this unit. We continue to find value in having this unit and the partnerships with nonprofit organizations throughout our city. And I wish they were here. They could tell you their individual stories because they have quite a few of them. And I'm really proud of the work that they do every day on behalf of our unhoused neighbors in our city.
For Zach, I wanted to ask you about the lingering effects of redline, but I wanted to take a quick participation poll. And don't worry, this engagement doesn't count towards your grade. You just can't get the professor out of me. But could I see a show of hands, how many people are familiar with the concept of redlining? Awesome. I will tell you, I didn't know what redlining was until I was a graduate student in political science. And it's horrifying to say that because it's made such an impact in our community. But that's partly what I'd like to hear you talk about. If you could describe in terms of when we discuss the lingering effects of redlining, what we see today, and then maybe some of the current housing regulations and how those policies are impacting our communities too.
So the primary tool that we use as U.S. Attorney's Office to enforce, through the civil division I was talking about, to enforce our housing laws and regulations really is the Fair Housing Act that, dates back, to 64, 65, that back then Congress recognized, and I think the government still recognizes today, that housing is one of those, core sort of, rights and kind of parts of who we are as individuals that ties into everything. Your access to quality education, your access to government services, the safety of your neighborhood, your ability to build generational wealth, to have something to pass on to your children. And when through discriminatory practices like redlining, like appraisal discrimination, when people in the provision of actual access to housing, to rental properties, or to financing to obtain a house, in the services when you're trying to sell a house to hopefully make some money and move on to another, unfortunately we see all sorts of different manifestations of discrimination that pop up in those processes that we identify either through reports from the community about individual instances or circumstances, working with community groups who are really active in this space to call issues to our attention as a U.S. Attorney's Office, or our analysis of data from lenders, for example, to see are there patterns of discrimination either in terms of steering buyers of one background into one neighborhood, or denying loan applications based not on finances but on these discriminatory practices. And the reason enforcing those laws is so important is because we aren't really going to make that promise of equal protection under the law real if everyone doesn't have the freedom to live somewhere and raise and grow their families and have safety for their families on equal footing as everyone else. I mean, the Justice Department was stood up back in 1870 for this explicit purpose of really enforcing some of the early civil rights laws and amendments. And so that kind of work, and especially in the housing area, is really core to who we are as an agency. And by bringing actions, or frankly by just seeking, making contact with some people who might be doing things the wrong way, and bringing to their attention, what the rules are, what the law is, and helping them to get in compliance so we don't have to sue them, can be, even more impactful in terms of using our resources. But we still see today, in 2024, that there are issues of people getting appraisals that are, different if, it is their friend of one racial background who is interacting with the appraiser and, believed to be the homeowner as opposed to if someone else does. And I know there was a lot of, investigative work around that recently. And so this isn't just a historical problem. This isn't just something, you read about when you're studying to be, a political science professor. Unfortunately, it's the day-to-day reality for a lot of our friends and neighbors. And when you're not able to secure housing, when you're not able to build wealth through housing, then that's one of those drivers towards housing instability. So by taking action through enforcement of federal law to uphold the laws that help people have access to the sort of this core part of who we are as people, hopefully we're going to be able to make our communities better places to live.
We had a question in the last panel that feels really well suited for you right now. And it was talking about someone who felt that their criminal background prevented them from securing housing. How does that interact with the Fair Housing Act? Or to what extent could that be influential, or is that straight up discriminatory if someone's asking whether or not you've committed a felony in the past and using that in a certain way to calculate whether or not they choose to rent or sell to you?
So I want to be careful because this isn't the area I litigated in, but there are a number of both financing programs and other sort of federally supported housing that does and can take into account, and renters or others are permitted to take certain types of criminal history into account. But if that discrimination that people are concerned about is not based on something that is within sort of the law to be able to look at, but is instead just sort of a proxy for something like racial discrimination, that's problematic and something that we need to know about. And really, until an investigation is done and sort of you look at documents, you talk to witnesses, you're not really sure what's going on there. So for all of the kinds of issues we deal with here, we really ask the community to just bring things to our attention and let us sort of look and figure out, is this something we can do something about? And not every issue is going to be either because it might not meet the elements of the statute or because the impact of one particular matter might not be sufficient to assign some of our attorneys, and we might instead refer you to outside organizations that might be able to provide assistance. But we can't bring any cases we don't know about. And so I encourage anyone having issues or concerns in this area to go to our website. Just Google U.S. Attorney's Office, Southern District of Indiana, and you can go to our civil rights page, and there's a form there to report civil rights concerns, including issues around housing. And sometimes you feel like you're just like throwing a note into a well, but every time someone sends one of those forms in or emails our civil rights email box, it goes to each and every one of the civil and criminal attorneys who handle cases in this area for our office, and they always look carefully at it to see if there's something they can do about it.
Andrew, you talked about what your program Outreach does in terms of helping children that are unhoused. And I was wondering if you could describe some of the trends that you've seen. In particular, I think of all the metrics when we say like pre-COVID and post-COVID, and how many unfortunate things have increased and how many really positive things feel like they've decreased. But if we looked maybe before 2020, or just anecdotally from your experience in this role, what are the trends? How have things changed for the children who are unhoused in our community?
Yeah, I mean, I think more than anything, COVID was a light that was shown on issues that already existed. I mean, it wasn't necessarily COVID that sparked new issues. There were ramifications of COVID, obviously, but more than anything, I think it showed us some of the glaring problems, especially with the housing situation in our city specifically. The reality is for our young people, especially, so again, like separating out the age populations, like 14 to 18, those that we work with, a handful might be emancipated minors, and so that's a unique situation. Others are part of family units that are experiencing homelessness, and that's a unique situation. But then you've got this 18 to 24-year-old population. They're young adults, right? Many of whom have children of their own, and who are struggling to make it. And many of whom, I tell this to everyone, they want a better future. They want to work. They want to eventually own their own home. Now that becomes a more distant dream in our reality now, owning your own home. But they have those desires. And so kind of what we've started to tell people, especially as it relates to the violence epidemic in our community is, we have to, as a community, shift the narrative, right? So we oftentimes look at this young population and we think, oh, they're troubled. Oh, if only they had parents in their household, then, maybe things would be different. The reality is these young people, yes, they are sometimes the perpetrators of crime, but a lot of times they're also the victims of crime. And so being able to recognize that when you work with this population, you engage with them, I might skip ahead a little bit because a lot of times we talk about employment as an answer. The reality is I can go and get any young person a job in our city. I really can. We can go to McDonald's tomorrow. We can get a young person a job. But what's inevitably going to happen is that in 2 weeks, they're going to show up late or they're going to get in an argument and they'll either get terminated or they'll walk off the job. So it's not getting the job, it's retaining the job that becomes the problem. And just as much as we put an effort into helping those young people develop conflict mediation skills, ways to deal with their trauma, these pieces, I am intrinsically interested in figuring out how we can train employers in how to deal with employees who have had traumatic experiences. And not just our youth, but any employee, right, who's been experienced to trauma, because we know that trauma has an impact on the brain, and that leads to a number of different issues that can come out in the workplace, including things that lead to workplace violence. So I think the conversation is more nuanced, and oftentimes we can travel down the same old paths, get them a job, teach them some soft skills, just continue to do the same programs, or we can start to look for innovative ways to maybe provide some different wraparound services and bring a community together around these individuals.
It sounds like you're talking a lot about some of the stigmas that can be really damaging, as much as the actual institutions and processes. What would you recommend for people to challenge their own preconceptions?
Oh yeah, I mean, so here's the reality. I was having this conversation with someone the other day. We had a young person who brought a firearm into our program center, which is that's not new, that's not unheard of. We just noticed it this time. And we started to have, as a staff, a lot of conversations around safety and well-being and those things. And we naturally looked at it from our lens, right? Well, like, this puts me in a dangerous spot. Yes, absolutely. Like, firearm, we're not comfortable with that, obviously. But also, what I didn't hear in that conversation was the question, why does that young person have the firearm? What was it about the firearm that young person felt like they needed? Where did they get access to the firearm, right? And then, what are their plans with the firearm? Because if you talk to some of our youth, right, the stigma around it is, well, everyone's just loaded and they're packing and like they're out causing trouble. No, some of our young people are carrying because they feel like they have to, because it's life or death for them. That's the reality of it. Do I like that they have increased access to firearms? No, absolutely not. But it's also the reality of what we're dealing with right now. And so being able to challenge even our staff, ourselves, to try to look at things from a different perspective, to try to understand the individual. I think you said it at the beginning, this is really about relationship for us, right? At the end of the day, I think that's the role that every single person can play, right? We may not be able to influence the highest levels of policy, though I think we have a role to play in that too. But we can absolutely sink into the relationships that make a difference, that prevent violence, that prevent homelessness, that prevent domestic violence as well. That's a role that all of us can play.
Tiffany, you talked earlier about some of the challenges that domestic violence survivors face, particularly even just being able to find housing that separates them from the issue. Could you talk about, I know it's hard to typify an average domestic violence survivor, but what that experience might be like, what the process is they go through to find safe, affordable housing.
Well, I will tell you the process is long, especially as Andrew was just saying, it's the crisis that we're living in right now, it takes time. So for us, you know, we take that initial crisis call, we assess their needs. Most of the time, the needs is either they need financial needs, the reason why they're calling, maybe they need a protective order, or they're seeking shelter, whether they have already actively fled from their abuser and they need emergency shelter, or they are looking to safely flee. And for some of the victims, they're looking for transitional housing or to find their own permanent housing. And because of the housing crisis that we're living in right now, it is hard. And so we will provide them, we will assess their income. We will ask them, are you currently employed? If they tell us yes or no, if they say yes, then we will dig into their income and we will ask them, what is it that you can afford? Please, you know, share that amount with us. And then they'll either tell us, well, this is the max amount I can afford. And then we will do a deep search and provide that victim with affordable housing that is within their area, their desired area, or if they are wanting to relocate to another county, then we will look in that county and also provide them with that as well. If they don't have a desirable income or they are unemployed, then we will work with them through our economic sustainability program and we will help them find a job. We will go through the whole process, resume building, and an interview preparation, connecting them to get other resources such as clothing and stuff like that. And then we would kind of work with them to slowly get to that point where they can hopefully secure and find housing. But right now it's taken weeks, months, and some of these victims we've been working with for a year to a year and a half, if not longer, just because, as Andrew was saying, COVID didn't hit and just say, oh, surprise, all of this is new. It just did unfortunately heighten and highlighted these issues that we have and has continuously had for decades. And for us, it just made things a lot more complicated and worse for victims in trying to safely flee and secure any type of housing. And it's unfortunate. I wish I could say that every victim that calls has that. We're able to say, oh, you know what? We have this connection here, this apartment complex, and they have, 7 units available, and it's very affordable. But unfortunately, it's not. I mean, if you look 5 years ago, you could secure a 1-bedroom apartment or 2-bedroom apartment for maybe under anywhere from $600 to maybe $1,000. Now you're looking at anywhere from $1,200 to $1,800. In some cases, you're looking at over $2,000. That's more than a mortgage for most people. And our victims usually go from 2 incomes to 1, or maybe they've never had an income. And so they don't understand how to budget. They don't understand, how am I going to pay for a 2,000-bedroom, 1-bedroom apartment, and I have 4 kids? So it definitely takes time, and we tell our advocates to let victims know that right up front. Don't sugarcoat it. Don't tell them, oh, well, we can have you a place tomorrow, because that's not the likelihood, especially nowadays.
As I mentioned earlier, we had several question submissions from our audience, from our community members like you. And one fantastic question that we got from a community member said, in your dream world, is there something that can be done to keep guns out of the hands of minors? How would this happen? Can enough teens be trained in nonviolent methods of solving incidents to make a difference? Where would you start? And I'm going to throw that out to everyone. If you feel called to answer, please do.
Well, one of the things that we've been really focused on as the Justice Department is people who are unlawfully putting guns in the hands of minors. So of course, we have both constitutional and statutory provisions that provide for folks' rights in terms of acquiring lawfully and possessing lawfully firearms. Unfortunately, a lot of the gun violence, and probably predictably, is associated with people who either obtained or are possessing the firearm unlawfully. And so issues like gun trafficking, where people are for profit and sometimes kind of scale, obtaining firearms and putting them in the hands of people who have no business having them under the law, and including sometimes minors who have no business having them. Those sorts of issues, whether it's the firearm or you've heard often, I'm sure, about these Glock switches, these machine gun conversion devices that we're finding, in the hands of too many of our youth as well. I mean, it's 2024, and we're finding ourselves as Justice Department prosecuting, statutes that were put in place, in the 1930s to fight, Al Capone and, the gangsters in Prohibition. But today, we've got kids running around with machine guns. And, if you would have told me 10 years ago as a federal prosecutor that one of our top violent crime issues would be children with machine guns, I would have looked at you like, you had two heads. And unfortunately, that is where we live right now. And, our police officers on the street interacting with, youth who don't know, and, young adults and sometimes older adults who don't know, at the beginning of that encounter is this individual possessing this gun lawfully. Has this gun been modified to make it fully automatic? Those issues are kind of deeply, problematic and deeply dangerous for members of the community as well as law enforcement. But to try to stop getting, those unlawful transfers, one of the things that we focus on is when firearms are obtained from a youth who has it unlawfully, digging in some an investigation. Well, where'd this gun come from? We know that too many of these guns are coming from burglaries from homes or vehicles, sometimes from vehicles that are unlocked, and people are leaving a loaded firearm in their glove box. You wouldn't leave $1,000 in cash in an unlocked glove box parked out on the street, but a deadly weapon, some people are. And so, you've got youth who are obtaining stolen guns that way, or people who are burglarizing, federally licensed gun dealers. But, a lot of also we see is straw purchases where people are unlawfully, lying when they're obtaining a gun and saying it's for them, and it's actually, for someone else who couldn't themselves go and obtain it, sometimes including, our youth who are prohibited from buying certain kinds of guns at certain ages and are trying to get around that by having someone else go in and make the purchase for them. In fact, not too long ago, we brought a prosecution and succeeded in getting a significant federal prison sentence against, unfortunately, a mother who helped her son, who she knew was involved in gang activity and violence and was shooting and robbing people, and was a minor. And she went and got him unlawfully a firearm and put that in his hands. And ultimately, that gun was allegedly used to commit a murder, and I know that that's still being prosecuted. And then she disposed of that gun, threw it into a river, and we prosecuted her under the statute federally that bars people from giving a gun to a minor who they know is engaged in violent crime. But we're doing everything we can to target the sources of those guns, because we don't really, we almost never prosecute, juveniles in federal court. And when you see that happen, it's almost always, part of a larger conspiracy and people have been killed. And that's just not what we're built for, as opposed to our partners in state court. But those who are putting the guns in the hands of people who might be minors who then are going out and using them unlawfully, that's something that's a priority for us. And hopefully by enforcing, the laws there, people who are obtaining guns are going to be careful and not, engage in those transactions in violation of federal law.
What was the last part of the question, too?
Yeah, actually, Andrew, I was thinking of you because it reminded me of what we were talking about with stigma. The last part was, can enough teens be trained in nonviolent methods of solving incidents to make a difference, and where do you start?
I mean, that's interesting. I think if we were going to roll out mandatory conflict mediation training, I'd start in Hamilton County. Because I think typically, here's why. I think typically when we think about conflict mediation and how great those programs should be and where they should be targeted, we automatically think of the city. And if we're honest with ourselves, we typically think, man, that'd be something that those black and brown kids would really benefit from. The reality is, I was over here at my kids play at the Fall Creek Little League. There was a big argument the other day when they were playing baseball. Parents always get ramped up about these things. And a couple of parents were kind of going at it, and I was right there. And, it was a little heated. And I didn't pull out a firearm and shoot anyone. I didn't get in a physical fight with anyone. But what prevented me? It wasn't a conflict mediation class that I took, right? It was because, one, I didn't have access to a firearm in that moment. I didn't have a firearm on me, okay? And then two, it was because, and we can say the morality piece, right? We can say, like, yes, our values, and those are good and those are important. But and from a very practical sense, number two, I have a lot to lose. I have a future. I have a family I'm responsible for. If I get in a fight, that's going to hit the news, right? Like, there's just a lot at stake. And so often for our young people, when we talk about a solution to prevent conflict, we go to, like, let's create a program and let's roll out a training for them. My thing is, man, like, let's look at it from a holistic piece. Do they have hope for their future? Do they have hope that there is something on the line? If I choose to step into this conflict, it is going to cost me something. Because right now, for a lot of our young people, I mean, the consequence of stepping into a conflict in that way, it actually isn't, it isn't that bad compared to what it could be for them, right? I mean, for a lot of them, they have resigned themselves to the fact that, like, yeah, I'm probably going to get into some trouble in my life. And that's okay, because the reality is, especially for my youth and young adults who are engaged in different activities that I probably wouldn't want them to be involved in, what they tell me is, well, okay, find me a job that pays that much, find me an opportunity that's this good, and it's hard for us to be like, well, you should just go and do the right thing, the right thing doesn't get me where I want to be. The right thing doesn't get me the white picket fence anymore. The right thing doesn't get me, 2.5 kids and married and working a salaried job. And so if we're gonna address these issues, we gotta address it holistically, not programmatically.
That's really heavy, but I think you're right. I was going to ask a question about barriers, but I don't know how other people feel. I could use a feeling of a little bit of upliftedness right now. So maybe the way I'll phrase it is thinking about in your line of work, as you interact with these challenges in our community, maybe what is a barrier you see, but also where could that opportunity be in response to that?
Barriers. Well, I think that we've associated some of those, right? I think that they're the barrier that I'm starting to wake up to more than ever as we refocus ourselves on trying to stem this tidal wave of youth violence, because it is. Since 2016 in our community in Indianapolis, the numbers of those individuals, our young people involved in homicide and non-fatal shootings, and that's both suspects and victims, is almost 3 times. It's gone up almost 3 times. And as we see some of this other things dipping, the barrier that I see when I interact with more youth now, because we're trying to listen to them more. We spend too much time talking at our children rather than listening to them, and we're all guilty of it. Every one of us. I find it doing it myself in my house with my own children. And this year and late last year, I had the opportunity to get some groups of young people together and just listen. And he summed it up perfectly. And I see Anthony Beverly in the room, who works with our youth and is engaged with Stop the Violence every single day. Hope is a barrier for a lot of our kids. They don't believe that they're going to live past the age of 18 or 19 years old. And so carrying a gun and being caught in a neighborhood by the police with a gun is not a big deal to them. They're not, it's okay, so what? The not being caught, or being caught in their neighborhood without a gun by someone else, is much bigger reality to them. And so the opportunity, I think, in that negativity that I just laid out there, is that the kids don't have hope. They don't feel like they're going to live past that, is that we know where we have to get to as a community, as a society, and that's much further upstream I interacted with a group of young 10, 11-year-olds yesterday, and my comments to them was, one, you are loved. There is hope in the world. Treat each other kindly. Treat people like you want to be treated. Now, that whether that resonates with them or not, for me, we have to get to our kids much earlier. They are suffering trauma none of us recognize. I didn't even know what trauma was, and 15 years, 10, 12 years into my police career, what is that? What is this trauma? What is this? I don't know what that is. I see it now. I see it manifest every single day in bad behavior and bad decisions that the kids don't even know that they're going through. And they're experiencing this trauma much earlier in their life, and we have to get to them much earlier in their life to deal with it. Otherwise, it's going to continue to perpetuate into that hopelessness, into bad behavior, bad decisions, especially in a group of people, human beings, whose brain is not fully developed. They still they're not making good decisions. You couple it with poor nutrition, all those things, their brains are not developing like they're meant to. And so the opportunity is there. We know where we got to get, and we just have to figure out a way together to get to them earlier, and give them that hope that's missing, and let them see that their life is much bigger and much longer than 19 years.
You know what I like about that? That feels like something we can all do, right? You talked about those affirmations. My daughter, on our way to walk to kindergarten every day, would practice and recite these affirmations, and one of them was, I am loved. And I think to be able to tell that to everyone's children, not just our children, but everyone's children, might be able to make some of that difference.
Just to add on to that, because these kids are really touching me this year. And School 43, having lunch with another group, same age group, that 10, 11 group, and I noticed this young black female just hovering around me. The opposite of typically what you see somebody in that demographic doing. An older white guy in uniform, just there, and someone's hovering around you. And other than saying to me, hey, why can I see through your hair? Right, which...
It's a compliment.
Yeah, you can see through your hair. After I got past that, I started wondering, and she kept coming back, and then finally she asked me, can I have a hug? Just no reason, just have a hug. And then I started talking to her counselor in there. I'm like, that girl, there's an opportunity here to get to her, and they did. But those interactions that many of us don't have an opportunity to see, because we live in different worlds, and we don't come from those worlds and can't even understand it, and including myself. But we have to do a better job of listening to our children and watching the signs, and even if it's one or two of them, picking them out to get them some sort of intervention to help them.
Well, I know that one of the barriers that I think we've seen from our position as prosecutors and federal prosecutors in trying to sort of have the impact on our community that we want is trust. That, every time there is, a incident that is obviously upsetting, involving law enforcement interaction with a lot of our communities, and particularly our marginalized communities, or neighborhoods who feel like, law enforcement must not care about me and care about our family because we're having to hear gunshots every night, and my children are getting shot waiting for the school bus, and all sorts of horrific impacts of the violence that we were talking about that make people feel like they and the people around them aren't being seen, aren't cared about by the government. And then we come to them and want their help as witnesses, want them to report crimes to us, want them to sit on a jury and listen to the evidence and trust that the law enforcement witnesses are telling them the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And it's a real challenge to rebuild trust, because no matter how many times prosecutors, law enforcement officers do the right thing, and the vast majority of people are doing the right thing, or trying to do the right thing almost all the time, one person making a wrong choice anywhere in the country knocks back down past all the rebuilding we're trying to do, and can tear down that trust so quickly and easily that so many people have fought to build. And so it is a real challenge. When we started as U.S. attorneys, one of the first things that Attorney General Garland told us was one of our missions as federal prosecutors was to get out there and bolster the trust of the community in the Department of Justice, in the criminal justice system. But one of the things that I like to, especially talking to youth, groups about, but really any, community engagement, is that, prison, especially federal prison, is not the solution to all that ails us. And we are built as the Department of Justice to, build investigations and prosecutions that ultimately almost always, are designed to send somebody to prison, to hold them accountable, to make the public safe, to, promote respect for the law, and all the things that we know are what we're trying to seek out of the convictions and sentences we're pursuing. But that's a very blunt tool that is not appropriate in every situation. And, I think law enforcement writ large and federal prosecution in particular, we can't be, the primary care. My parents are doctors, and they talk about, the primary care provider, the person who you're seeing for those well checkups, who are making sure you're on your medications, who are talking to you to see if, what complaints you might have and how, a plan might be put together to help you improve. We're the emergency department. The bad thing has already happened. Someone has already, had that heart attack. Someone's already been shot or stabbed, and we're trying to stop the bleeding and save the patient. And, and then they go back, into the community. They go back into the hands of their primary care provider, and we wish them the best. But, I think the chief was talking earlier about how there's so many things that are being put on the plate of law enforcement that we're not built to do. And it's, we're full of people who are talented and caring and wanting to serve their public, so they're doing the best they can. But, we need help from everybody else because we don't have all the tools that are the best fit for the job. But that ties into sort of my area of hope, which is when I'm doing these engagements, hearing from, I think there's someone here in the audience who was with me a couple months ago when we were at a school, hearing from a group of sort of rising youth activists. And they were talking about how they're engaging with their peers to say, hey, you're walking around with this firearm because you feel as though you're unsafe, but by doing that, you're making things worse for all of us. So how can we come up amongst ourselves with conflict resolution, programs, resources? How do we learn how to disagree without somebody getting hurt? And youth and young people and community organizations, religious, faith-based organizations, folks being willing to take that up to address these issues themselves and address them before the violence happens. That's the key, because we only get involved once a crime is already happening or is ongoing. And we hope that the prosecutions we bring and people who are removed from the community because of what they've done, we hope that protects the public from further crimes of that individual. But to have the greatest impact, we're trying to prevent crime in the first place. And so that's where everyone else stepping up and taking leadership and working alongside us, or even us following behind them, can be really critical.
I want to add to that as well. I mean, you guys said a lot about hope and trust, and that's definitely something that we do on our end with the victims that we serve. Is the one thing that we hear from them is that no one believes them. And that is why they don't report to law enforcement, why they don't come forward, why they still stay with their abusers, is because they don't believe that someone's going to truly believe that they are being victimized. And for us, we listen to them. We tell them, this is not your fault, we believe you. And another thing is education. Education is key. Forming partnerships is a huge part of helping to stop violence. If you're educating the community, you're continuously educating yourself, and you're building partnerships, you can help make a difference, and you can help slowly, some way, shape or form, maybe one day we can say violence doesn't exist. But in order to get there, you have to work together as a community. You have to listen to people when they're coming forward and they're telling you, hey, this is happening in my house, or this is happening in my community. I need help. What are the resources that are available? Who do I turn to? How do I safely report to law enforcement? How do I safely get the resources that I need without being discriminated against, without someone telling me, oh, this isn't really happening, it's all in your head? And so of all the barriers that we hear victims tell us that they face, we try at our end to try to help break down those barriers, by listening to them, by forming partnerships, and by educating the victims as well.
Someone had a question that I think we've already addressed, but I had it in here. And they talked about Father Greg Boyle saying, nothing stops a bullet like a job. And one of the things I'm hearing is nothing stops a bullet like love or trust or community or education, right? So many of the things that we're echoing here that lead to the last community question that I have, and thank you for whoever submitted this one. It's one of my favorites. But one of our community members asked, what can we as neighbors, for congregation members, people of faith, I don't think you have to have faith, what can we as community members do to have an impact on these challenges in our community, either individually or collectively as a group?
I mean, I'll jump in. And also address the last question too, because I think I talked a lot about the barriers and I probably didn't give enough hope there. I am finding more and more hope through these conversations, because inevitably through these conversations, more people are getting engaged. There are some phenomenal grassroots organizations and programs that are coming up in our city. I say that, and I'm part of an agency really that has been established and has been around for a long time. But man, we need more of these grassroots programs and grassroots relationship building to continue in our city. Just over here in the apartment complexes, for a while, there were some really good walks that were going on through the complex that was all about building relationship with the residents there, in the hope that by building relationship that they could prevent violence from happening. I think like that has to be the key for what we're doing. Education in this format is phenomenal. It's great. I'm glad people are becoming educated and aware of the issues. But if we just sit with our knowledge, I don't know if that really changes much. I think for each of us, it's a push into relationship. It's a push into community, like you were saying. Father Gregory Boyle, I mean, the guy's fascinating. I mean, he created these social enterprises out in California that worked with ex-gang members. And brilliant, and he provided them jobs, but more than anything, he provided them community and love. And so for some of us who are like, I can't go and create a social enterprise, I can't go and create a nonprofit organization, maybe you can't do that, but you can sure step into relationship with someone, and then as you hear about great organizations that could be a resource, you can be the advocate that connects them. Or if you hear about a situation that needs to be reported to law enforcement, you can go with them, and you can be that shoulder that they can lean on. That's what we need in this community, and I think that's going to make a tremendous impact when more people step into that relationship.
Yeah, kind of like more being like an active bystander, and that's something that we, when we're out training the community, is we tell people, be an active bystander. Do so safely, but you can be an active bystander. You can engage. If you see something, report it. If you see a victim who needs help, help them. Provide them with referrals. Just by you engaging with them makes a difference. And that's all it takes, is just that one step. Just walking up to them or intervening. It can be life-changing. And if you're helping them, it can go a long way.
I have to say, I know I learn a lot in each one of these panels, and sometimes it's very sobering, and it can be easy to be afraid of some of the knowledge we learn and some of the statistics and the facts, and easy to distance yourself. But when we end these, I personally always feel like I have a lot of hope. I have a lot of different inroads for things that I can do on an individual level or as part of a group, even the recognition of things that sometimes feel small and insignificant, but might for someone be a world of change. Can we go ahead and give our panelists a very generous round of applause? they're more than deserving of that. And before we conclude this evening, I just want to remind you, in terms of ways that you can collectively be involved, that we are partnering with Gleaners Food Bank. So every Tuesday from June through August, at the 75th and Shadeland parking lot for that shopping center, that is 3 to 5, and you can sign up to serve at castletonumc.org. Since I messed that up earlier, I apologize, /Gleaners. And also to remind you that we have 2 more forums coming up. If you missed the last one, or if you enjoyed this one so much, you want to watch it again later or share it with somebody else you know, you can again go to castleton.umc.org, /housing. Our next forum will be on Tuesday, July 16th. So you can go ahead and mark your calendars, 6:30. And we'll be focusing in terms of housing's impact on health incomes. And then our final installment of this series will be in August. And that's going to be on August 6th, again, a Tuesday at 6:30, focusing on government's role in housing. One last thing that I just want to remind you is that we're continuing to take an offering to help support our neighbors in the community for the Lawrence School Emergency Fund. And this helps directly support our students and their families that are facing either food emergencies or emergencies in terms of housing. And you can place an offering in the boxes that are located in the back of the church. You can also, of course, donate online, and that's at castletonumc.org /give. Can I have one more round of applause for our fantastic panel this evening? And I want to thank you again for coming out tonight. I hope to see you again in our next installment next month in July. Thank you.
Saw you in person a few weeks ago, but I didn't get to catch you to say hi.